The smell reached Owen first. It was not the dry, mineral smell of Dura's prime that he had grown used to over the past 4 months. This was something older, something that sat low in the air and did not move. He had smelled it before, on a battlefield, behind a collapsed building, in the back rooms of places where things were left to quietly stop being alive. He had been walking the outer fence line of the diplomatic outpost because he could not sleep. That was all. No mission, no orders, just boots on dry ground and the two pale moons of Dura's prime hanging above him like a pair of half-shut eyes. The fence ended at a row of low structures he had never paid attention to. They sat at the edge of the Dravith settlement grounds, about 300 meters past the last outpost light. No signs, no guards, just wire and shadow. He stopped walking. Something inside one of those structures made a sound, not loud, not dramatic, a small, scraping sound like claws on stone, followed by something that might have been a breath. Owen stood still for a moment, then he walked toward it. The pens were 6 enclosures arranged in a row, each about the size of a small room. The wire was thick and the posts were sunk deep. Whatever had built these had not wanted anything inside them to leave. The ground inside each pen was bare. No water dishes, no feed, no bedding. In the first pen, curled against the far wall, was a dragon hatchling. Owen had seen Dravith adults before. They were tall, broad-chested creatures with scales the color of dark copper, 4 limbs, 2 wings, and a bearing that made every room feel smaller. The hatchling in the first pen looked like someone had sketched one from memory and gotten parts of it wrong. Its left wing was half the size of its right. It was thin in a way that young animals should never be. It looked at him with one yellow eye and did not move. He walked the length of the pen slowly. 6 hatchlings, 6 enclosures. 2 were asleep or something close to it. One had a cloudy eye and sat very still, tilting its head at sounds rather than at Owen's movement. One was so small it barely looked like a hatchling at all, more like an idea of one. The 5th had scales that caught the moonlight strangely, almost see-through in patches, and it pressed itself flat against the ground when Owen came close. The last one, the one with the stunted wing, watched him the entire time without blinking. A voice came from behind him. "You should not be in this area." Owen turned. A Dravith handler stood a few meters back holding a dim lantern. He was not hostile. He sounded, if anything, slightly bored. "What are these?" Owen asked. The handler looked at the pens the way someone looks at furniture they have stopped noticing. "Discards," he said. "Hatchlings born outside the acceptable range. The bloodline houses place them here." Owen looked back at the pens. "And then what?" "And then nothing," the handler said. "Nature finishes what the bloodline started." Owen did not say anything for a long moment. "How long does that take?" The handler shrugged. "Depends, weeks sometimes, longer if they are stubborn." Owen looked at the small one. It had lifted its head and was watching him with both eyes, one of which did not quite focus correctly. It looked, he thought, extremely stubborn. "Does anyone come to check on them?" "I do a walkthrough once a day, required by settlement regulation." The handler paused. "You are with the human delegation." "Yes." "There is nothing here that concerns your delegation." Owen nodded slowly. He took one more look at all 6 pens. The hatchling with the stunted wing had not looked away from him once. He walked back to the outpost. He did not go to sleep. He sat at his desk and pulled up the Galactic Union diplomatic framework on his screen and read through 3 hours of custody law, species rights clauses, and cultural non-interference protocols. He made notes. He crossed things out. He found 2 paragraphs that were interesting and read them 4 times each. When the outpost started waking up around him, he walked down the hall and knocked on Dr. Adola's door. She opened it looking half asleep, holding a cup of something hot. "Owen, it is very early. Did you know there are discarding pens on the settlement edge?" She looked at him. "The what?" "6 hatchlings, left to die, about 300 meters past the south fence. Ren Adola stared at him for a long moment. "I have been here 2 years," she said quietly. "I did not know." "Nobody knows," Owen said. "That is part of how it works." He left her standing in her doorway and walked to the office of Ambassador Drev. The ambassador was already at his desk, which Owen had expected, because the Dravith did not seem to sleep much. Owen placed a single sheet of notes on the desk. "I am filing a formal inquiry," Owen said. "I want to know if a human national can legally claim custody of discarded Dravith hatchlings under Union Framework Article 7, subsection 4. Ambassador Drev looked at the sheet. Then he looked at Owen. His expression was the careful, unreadable kind that diplomats practiced in mirrors. "This is a joke," Drev said. "No," Owen said, "I'll take them." He said it quietly, not as a challenge, not as a speech, just as a fact he had decided sometime between the smell and the walk home and the 3 hours of reading. The ambassador said nothing. Owen waited. Outside, on the other side of the settlement fence, 6 hatchlings sat in 6 pens in the early morning dark, and none of them knew yet that something had changed. They arrived in cages. Not the wire pens from the settlement, proper transport cages, metal and bolted. The Dravith handler who delivered them set each one down on the floor of Owen's converted storage bay, said nothing, and left before the door finished closing. No instructions, no records, no goodbye. Owen stood in the middle of the room and looked at 6 cages. The storage bay was the largest space he had been able to clear in 48 hours. He had moved supply crates, dragged in water troughs, laid down a layer of packed earth over the floor tiles. Dr. Adola had helped, mostly in silence, the kind of silence that meant she had a lot to say and was choosing not to say it yet. Owen opened the first cage. The hatchling inside, Pavo, he had started thinking of them by the names he had quietly assigned, lunged forward and bit down on his forearm hard enough to bruise through the jacket. Owen did not pull back. He sat still, arm in the hatchling's mouth, and waited. After a moment, Pavo let go. He scrambled to the back of the cage and stared at Owen with wide eyes, sides heaving. Owen opened the cage door fully and moved on to the next one. The first week was hard in a way he had not entirely expected. He had worked with trauma patients before, human ones, and he thought he understood the basic shape of the problem. An animal that has been left to die does not trust the thing that comes to feed it. The body learns to expect pain and reads kindness as a trick. He knew all of that. What he had not fully prepared for was the scale. 6 of them, all different, all frightened, all with their own version of hostile. Rasha, the one with the stunted wing, screamed at him every time he entered the room, a high scraping sound that the walls threw back at him. Goro, the one with the cloudy eye, did not scream. He simply tracked Owen by sound and lunged whenever Owen stepped too close. Eula sat in the corner and breathed cold mist that fogged the room and made the floor slippery. Den, the small one, had figured out how to climb the wall partitions and dropped things on Owen from above. Sorai pressed herself flat whenever he came near, scales going almost invisible, which meant he stepped on her twice before he learned to watch for the outline. Only Pavo kept a middle distance, not friendly, not attacking, just watching. Owen slept in a cot outside the bay door, 3 hours at a time, sometimes less. He ate standing up. He stopped checking his messages. Dr. Adola came by on the 4th day and stood in the doorway watching him refill the water troughs, while Rasha screamed and Den threw a rock at the back of his head. "Owen," she said. "I am fine," he said. "You have a bruise on your jaw. Goro got me this morning. I moved too fast, my fault." She was quiet for a moment. Counselor Nas came by. He wants to do a formal observation. "Tell him to wait." He said the Union Review panel is already discussing whether this arrangement is stable. Owen refilled the last trough. Rasha was still screaming. He had noticed, though, that she screamed louder when he was near the other hatchlings than when he was near her. He was starting to think it might not be about him at all. "Tell Nas he can observe when there is something worth observing," Owen said. Counselor Nas came anyway on the 6th day and stood outside the bay window for 11 minutes with a data pad. He wrote something. He left. He did not speak to Owen. On the 7th night, Owen was sitting on the floor of the bay, back against the wall, too tired to move. He had brought food in not for himself, and set it out in the center of the room and then retreated to his wall and closed his eyes. He heard the sound of small claws on the packed earth floor, slow, deliberate. He did not open his eyes. The sound stopped close to him. He could feel warmth, the kind that came off a living body. He opened his eyes. Pavo was sitting in front of him, not attacking, not fleeing, just sitting close enough that Owen could see the two missing claws on his right foreleg, the way the foot compensated and curled slightly inward. Owen did not move. Pavo leaned forward and pressed his head very slowly against Owen's open palm. Owen sat completely still and let it happen. Across the room, Rasha was watching. She had stopped screaming sometime in the last few minutes without Owen noticing. She was sitting up against the far wall, eyes bright in the low light, and she was absolutely, completely silent. Owen did not push it. He did not reach for her. He sat with Pavo's head in his hand and breathed slowly and looked at nothing in particular. He wrote a short message to the Earth Liaison office that night, just to keep the log current. Progress is slow, but it is progress. He sent it and went back to his cot. In the bay behind him, none of the 6 hatchlings were making any sound at all. 1 month in, Owen opened the bay door and let them outside. There was no ceremony to it. He simply unlocked the outer door, stepped back, and waited. For a long moment nothing happened. Then Pavo walked forward, sniffed the edge of the doorframe, and stepped through. Den followed, moving low to the ground, eyes scanning. The others came out one by one over the next few minutes, each in their own time. Rasha was last. She stood in the doorway for almost 30 seconds, looking at the open land ahead, the low scrub brush and pale grass of Dura's prime stretching out under a gray morning sky. Then she stepped out and stood very still, one good wing half spread, the small one barely lifting. Owen walked with them, not directing, just present. He had a notebook, an actual paper one, because screens had a way of drawing your eyes down and he wanted his eyes up. He wrote in it as they moved, quick notes, shorthand he could read back later. The first thing he noticed was Garu. The hatchling with the cloudy eye was moving through a section of tall brush, and he was moving with purpose, not randomly, not following scent the way Pavo often did with his nose low to the ground. Garu moved like he was reading something in the air, his head tilted in small increments. He changed direction twice and stopped at the base of a rock formation where a small, burrowing animal had made a hole in the earth. He had tracked it without seeing it. He had heard it or felt it, through some combination that Owen did not fully understand yet. Owen wrote it down. The second thing was Eula. They had been out for about 40 minutes when a ground predator appeared at the edge of the tree line. Low body, 6 legs, the kind that waited and then rushed. Owen had seen them before and knew they were fast. He felt his hand move toward the small deterrent device on his belt. Eula stepped in front of the group. She opened her mouth and breathed. Not fire, she had never produced fire, not once in a month. What came out was a dense, rolling, cold, white mist that spread low along the ground and frosted the earth on contact. The predator hit the frost-covered ground at full run, scrambled, lost footing, and veered hard left before disappearing back into the brush. The group stood in the quiet after it. Owen looked at the frosted ground, a wide band of it, maybe 4 meters across. The predator had not gotten within striking range of any of them. He wrote it down. He wrote a lot down that day. Sorai's translucent patches, which the Dravith had recorded as a scale defect, disappeared entirely in dappled shade. She did not become invisible exactly, but her outline broke apart in the light-tan shadow of the brush until she was genuinely difficult to track with the eye. Owen lost her 3 times, and she was standing 2 meters from him each time. Den was small, but what Owen had taken for general alertness was something more. The hatchlings seemed to process information in a specific order: threat distance, exit routes, group position, and moved accordingly, always placing himself between the group and the open ground. He was running a map in his head, Owen thought, continuously, and adjusting it. Rasha ran. Not flew. She could not fly, and she clearly knew it. But on the ground she was fast in a way that the others were not, low and driving, using her full wing for balance and her small one as a kind of rudder on turns. She covered ground quickly and came back and covered it again, ranging out and returning. Owen looked at his notebook when they got back. He had 3 pages of notes, and not one of them was a medical observation. They were all behavioral, all capability. He sat with the notebook open and thought about the Dravith biology records he had read in the first weeks, thick, detailed, centuries old, and the one thing they had in common about hatchlings born with these kinds of traits. They were listed under defects, documented at birth, then no further record. Because there was no further record, because no further record had ever been made. He found Dr. Adola in her lab and put the notebook on her desk. She read through it. The room was quiet. She turned pages slowly, read some sections twice, and did not say anything for a long time. "Owen," she said finally, "I know. This is not a medical record. No, it is not. These are—" She stopped. "The cold breath. That is not a failed fire gland. That is an entirely different biological system, one that has never been documented because every hatchling that had it was left in a pen," Owen said. She sat back. She looked at the notebook and then at him. Owen heard a sound behind him and turned. Ambassador Drev was in the hallway outside the open lab door. He had been passing, or he had stopped. He stood there for a moment, and Owen could not read his face, which was unusual. Drev's face was usually very readable. Then the ambassador walked away down the corridor, without a word. Owen turned back to Adola. She was still looking at the notebook. "They were not broken," Owen said. "They were just never read correctly." He picked up the notebook, went back to the bay, and sat down on his cot. Through the inner door he could hear the hatchlings moving around, the scratch of claws, the occasional low sound that he was starting to be able to tell apart, one from another. He turned to a fresh page and started writing again. The complaint arrived on a Tuesday, which Owen thought was a very bureaucratic day for something to go wrong. It came through the Union Council's formal grievance channel, filed under cultural property and bloodline rights, and it named Owen Brast, human national, as having unlawful possession of discarded Dravith bloodline property belonging to House Verath, one of the older noble families in the settlement. The complaint requested immediate return of the 6 hatchlings to Dravith custody. Owen read it twice, set it down, and went to feed the hatchlings. By the time he came back, Dr. Adola had already read it and was standing in the hallway with her arms crossed, and the particular expression she wore when she was 3 steps ahead of a problem and did not like where the steps were leading. "House Verath," she said. "That is Rasha's bloodline and Eula's." "And Goru's," Owen said, 3 of the 6. "They discarded them." "Yes. And now they want them back." "They do not want them back," Owen said. "They want the situation to go away. Those are different things." He was right, and they both knew it. The complaint was not about the hatchlings. It was about what Owen's notes represented. Dr. Adola had filed 3 preliminary observations with the Union Xenobiology Registry in the past 2 weeks, all flagged for peer interest. Word had moved the way it moved in small, closed communities, which was fast and with no particular regard for privacy. The review panel convened 5 days later in the outpost's formal meeting room. Counselor Nas chaired it, which Owen had expected and not looked forward to. 2 other council members sat beside him. The Dravith representative from House Verath stood at the far end of the table and did not sit. Owen sat alone on the other side. He had no legal representation because the union did not provide it for informal reviews. He had his notebook. The Verath representative made their case in 11 minutes. The hatchlings were discarded bloodline property. They had been placed in the settlement's lawful discarding pens according to established Dravith practice. The humans' claim had no standing under cultural sovereignty protections. Return them. Counselor Nas listened, made notes and turned to Owen. Owen opened his notebook. He did not argue standing. He did not argue rights. He asked a question instead. Has the Galactic Union, or any member species, conducted a formal longitudinal study of discarded Dravith hatchlings? I mean a study of what they become if they survive. Nas looked at the other panel members. That is not relevant to the question of custody. I would like an answer anyway, Owen said, for the record. A pause. No such study exists. Why not? Because none have survived long enough to. Nas stopped. He set his pen down. Owen let the silence sit for a moment. Then he placed his notebook, open to the relevant pages, on the table and turned it to face the panel. He walked them through 3 months of observations. He did not editorialize. He described what he had seen and when. He noted the date, the behavior, the context. The room was quiet for a long time after he finished. The Verath representative said that behavioral observations made by an untrained human observer had no scientific standing. Dr. Adola, from the back of the room where she had been sitting quietly this entire time, said that she had independently verified every single observation and filed them under her own credentials with the Xenobiology Registry, and they were currently under review by 2 senior xenobiologists on Vethori Station. The Verath representative did not have an answer for that. The panel took 40 minutes to deliberate. They came back with a provisional ruling. Owen's custody was extended for 6 months pending the completion of the formal xenobiological review. The cultural sovereignty claim was tabled, not dismissed. 1 panel member had abstained from the vote. Owen looked at the abstention record. The name beside it was Drev. He walked out of the building into the pale afternoon light of Dura's prime and found 6 juvenile dragons sitting in a cluster by the front step. They had broken out of the bay. Not destroyed anything. Not panicked. They had simply, at some point while he was inside, pushed the outer latch. Den had figured it out 2 weeks ago, and Owen had been meaning to change the mechanism, and followed his scent trail to the council building. Rasha was at the front of the group, sitting straight, watching the door. Owen stood on the step and looked at her. She looked back at him. Her small wing moved slightly. A habit he had noticed meant she was paying close attention. He sat down on the step. Pavo moved immediately and pressed into his side. The others arranged themselves around him in their various ways, Sarai flat and low, Goru tilting his head at the sound of distant voices through the building wall, Eula breathing small cold curls of mist in the warm air, Den sitting precisely where he could see all approach lines. Rasha did not move closer, but she did not look away either. Owen thought about the abstention. He thought about the hallway 3 weeks ago, Drev standing in the doorway of the lab, that unreadable face. He did not know what it meant. He was not sure it mattered yet. He sat with 6 dragons on the council building steps and watched the sun move across the sky of Dura's prime, and for the first time in months, he did not feel like he was fighting something. He just felt like he was exactly where he was supposed to be. The fire started in the east. Owen smelled it before he saw it. that sharp chemical bite that wildfires on Dura's prime carried because of the resin in the native brush. He and the hatchlings were 4 kilometers from the outpost, in the open scrubland where he ran their morning sessions, when the smoke column rose above the tree line like a dirty gray wall. His comm unit buzzed 3 times fast. Emergency channel. Settlement east, wildfire, wind-driven, moving toward the outer residential clusters. Response teams deploying. All non-essential personnel return to outpost. Owen stood and looked at the smoke. The hatchlings had all stopped moving. They were looking east, all 6 of them, reading the air. He thought about the residential clusters. He had walked through them twice on diplomatic visits. Low structures, family groupings, a lot of them. He thought about the settlement response teams and how long it would take them to reach the eastern edge from the main depot. He looked at his group. They were not soldiers. They were not trained for anything except what he had learned they could do by watching them. Goru was 7 months old. Eula had never been in a real emergency. Den was still smaller than he should be for his age. Owen had run field triage in a collapsed building on a planet where the air was mostly ammonia. He had learned a long time ago that perfect was the enemy of present. "All right," he said quietly. "Stay together and stay close." He started moving east. All 6 of them moved with him. The outer edge of the fire zone was already bad by the time they reached it. The wind was pushing the flames through the dry brush in fast, low lines, and the smoke was thick enough to cut visibility down to a few meters. Owen could hear distant shouting, the sound of the response teams further north, but the eastern edge was clear of responders and full of burning ground. He did not try to give orders. He watched and reacted. Eula understood before he said anything. She moved to the leading edge of the fire and breathed, long and steady, and a wide band of frost spread across the ground. The fire hit it and slowed. She moved along the line and breathed again. Owen ran behind her looking for gaps. Sarai went flat and moved through the smoke-filled brush in near silence. Her sensitivity to vibration picked up what eyes could not find in the gray air. She came back to Owen 3 times, each time pressing her foreleg briefly against the ground in the direction she had come from, a signal they had worked out during training sessions without Owen ever formally teaching it. He followed her lead twice. Both times he found Dravith civilians she had located by the tremor of their movement in the earth. 2 adult Dravith and 3 children, found in the first 40 minutes. Owen moved them to a clear patch behind Eula's frost line and told them to stay. Goru and Den were working together in the thick brush to the south. Owen caught glimpses of them between the smoke. Goru navigating by sound, Den running the position map, the 2 of them functioning like a unit. They emerged once, leading an elderly Dravith who had been completely disoriented by the smoke, and then went back in. Rasha ran the perimeter. She could not fly. Owen had watched her figure that out fresh every day for months, that moment of weight shift that did not become lift, the adaptation that followed. On the ground she was something else. She ran the fire's edge at speed, using her full wing as a heat shield, her body low and driving. When a section of burning tree fell across the path of a fleeing family, she was there before Owen could move, putting her shoulder into it, taking the heat, shoving it aside. She did not make a sound, she just worked. Pavo stayed with Owen the entire time. Close, quiet, always within arm's reach. When Owen lost his bearings in a thick smoke bank and stopped, Pavo walked in front of him and angled left, and Owen trusted him and followed, and they came out of the smoke 30 meters from where he had expected to be, exactly right. The formal response teams reached the eastern edge 45 minutes after Owen, and the hatchlings did. By then the frost line held. 14 survivors were sitting in the clear zone. The fire had not crossed into the residential cluster. Owen was sitting on the ground when the first vehicle arrived. He was covered in ash and his jacket was burned through on the left shoulder where a falling ember had landed. All 6 hatchlings were around him in various states of exhausted. Eula was curled in a ball, her cold mist breathing reduced to thin curls. Rasha had a long burn mark across her good wings leading edge that Owen was already mentally cataloging for treatment. Goro had his head down. Even Den, who rarely sat still, was lying flat. The first figure out of the response vehicle was Ambassador Drev. He walked across the frost-marked ground slowly, looking at the survivors, the frost line, the 6 hatchlings, Owen. He stopped a few meters away. His face was doing the unreadable thing again. Owen looked up at him. Drev said, "How did you know they could do that?" Owen thought about it for a moment. "I did not know," he said. "I just paid attention." Drev stood in the ash-gray quiet of the fire's edge and looked at the 6 juvenile dragons who had done something that had never been done, that no one had predicted, that no one had thought to expect. He did not say anything else, but he did not leave either. He stood there with them until the second vehicle arrived. 3 weeks after the fire, Ambassador Drev submitted a resolution to the Galactic Union. Owen found out from Dr. Adola, who found out from the administrative log, which was technically public record, but which almost no one ever read. The resolution was 3 pages long. It proposed the formal end of the discarding pen tradition across all Dravith settlements under Union jurisdiction, to be replaced by a structured early assessment program for hatchlings born outside standard parameters. The program outline, attached in the appendix, cited Owen's observational methodology by name. Owen read it once, set it down, went to check on Rasha's wing. The burn had healed better than he had hoped. She let him apply the treatment now without pulling away, which 3 months ago would have seemed impossible. She still watched him with that flat, measuring look while he worked, the look that meant she was deciding whether something was acceptable. He had learned to find it reassuring. It meant she was thinking, not reacting. The formal session convened in the main diplomatic hall on a gray afternoon. Owen sat in the observer section because he had not been asked to speak and did not particularly want to. Dr. Adola sat beside him. She had a data pad. He had his notebook. The debate was long and not always clean. Several Dravith noble house representatives objected on grounds of cultural tradition, bloodline sovereignty, and what one of them called the inappropriate influence of an outside species on internal Dravith practice. Councillor Nas did not object but also did not advocate, which was its own kind of statement. 2 Vethori delegates raised procedural concerns about timeline. Ambassador Drev sat at the head of the table and answered every objection in the same quiet, precise way he answered everything. Owen watched him and thought that the ambassador was a man who had been thinking about this for a long time and had decided which side of it he stood on. At some point, Nas looked toward the observer section and found Owen with his eyes. Owen looked back. Nas looked away first. The resolution passed by 4 votes. Not a landslide, not a declaration. 4 votes recorded and a new policy written into Union framework. Owen walked out of the hall into the cool Dura's prime evening. The sun was low and the sky was the particular flat orange it turned in the hour before dark. He walked back to the outpost and went directly to the bay. The hatchlings had grown. That was the thing that still caught him sometimes, how much they had grown. They were adolescents now, and the bay was starting to feel too small, which was a problem he had already solved on paper, pending the delivery of construction materials for the expanded habitat on the outpost's south side. Union approved, funded, confirmed 3 weeks ago. He sat down in the middle of the bay floor. Pavo came to him immediately, the way he always did, and settled his considerable weight against Owen's side. Owen put a hand on his flank and felt the slow, deep breathing. Den came and sat precisely to Owen's left, the way he always positioned himself. Goro tilted his head at the sound of Owen's voice when he said something quiet to Den, then moved closer. Sarai arrived silently from wherever she had been, which was always a mystery, and settled at the edge of the group, watchful. Eula circled once, the way she sometimes did when she was thinking about something, and then lay down a meter away with her head on her front feet, letting small cold curls drift from her nose in the warm air. Rasha sat by the far wall. Owen looked at her, she looked at him. This was the way it had always been with her. Not hostility anymore, that had burned off sometime around the 3rd month. But she held a distance that the others did not hold, a space she kept between herself and the world, and Owen had stopped trying to close it. He just left the door open. After a long moment, Rasha stood and walked across the bay. She did not press against him the way Pavo did. She did not lean the way Pavo had that first night, the gesture that had started everything. She simply walked to within 1 meter of where Owen sat and then sat down herself, close enough that he could feel the warmth from her scales, and looked at the wall. Owen looked at the wall too. Dr. Adola appeared in the doorway after a while. She looked at the scene, 7 figures in the fading light, and did not say anything, which was the right call. Then she said, "There is a transfer request from a settlement on Ravik Station. New batch of discarded hatchlings, 4 of them. The assessment program does not have any trained handlers yet." Owen looked at Rasha's profile, the healed burn line on her wing, the one that would be there the rest of her life, the small stunted wing that had carried her through a wildfire at full run. "How many?" he said. 4. "When do they need the answer?" "Soon." He nodded slowly. He did not say yes out loud, because he did not need to, and Adola knew him well enough by now to know that the nod was the answer. She left him there with his group. He filed the log entry that night, the one the Earth Liaison Office received 3 days later, and forwarded to a Union archive where it sat in a database alongside 10,000 other field reports, unremarkable in format, entirely ordinary in length. It said, "They asked me why I took them. I did not have a complicated answer then. I still do not. Someone had to, and I was there." He closed the log and started packing.